The sound of the final construction truck pulling away was sweeter than any symphony. I stood on the sprawling travertine patio of my new home, swirling the amber liquid in my crystal glass. From here, I had a perfect view of the house next door. My old house, the one she took. And there she was, Sarah, standing on the peeling paint of her front porch, her hands clenched into fists. Her face, a mixture of pure, undiluted rage and utter disbelief, was a masterpiece of karmic art. She thought she had won. She thought she had left me with nothing. She didn't realize that the worthless, weed-choked lot she'd laughed at me for keeping was the key to my ultimate vindication. You might be wondering why a man would build a 3-story mansion directly next to the woman who divorced him and took everything. The simple answer is this: because I could. But the real answer is far more complex. It's a story of betrayal, not just by a wife, but by an entire family who saw me as nothing more than a stepping stone for their golden boy. It's a story about a man who was pushed into a corner, stripped of his dignity and left for dead, only to rise from the ashes they created. Every beam in this house, every pane of glass, every single marble tile is a testament to their mistake. They underestimated me. They celebrated my downfall. Now they get a front row seat to my ascension every single day for the rest of their lives. Why did I do it? To understand that, we have to go back to the beginning, to the day I first met her brother, Kevin, and the illusion of the perfect family began to crack. I met Sarah in college. She was bright, ambitious, and seemed to have a strong sense of family. That was important to me. I grew up an only child, and the idea of marrying into a large, close-knit family was appealing. Her parents, David and Linda, welcomed me with open arms. They were proud of Sarah, but it was her younger brother Kevin who they truly worshipped. Kevin was the golden boy. He was charming, handsome, and full of grand ideas, none of which ever seemed to pan out. He drifted from one get-rich-quick scheme to another, always with a charismatic pitch and an empty wallet. My first taste of this family's peculiar dynamic came about a year into our marriage. We were saving up for a down payment on a house, the very house Sarah now lives in. I was working long hours at a junior architectural firm, meticulously putting aside every spare dollar. One evening, Sarah came to me with a worried look. "Honey," she began, twisting her hands, "Kevin's in a bit of trouble. His business partner pulled out, and he needs $5,000 to cover the loss, or he could get sued." I was hesitant. $5,000 was a huge chunk of our savings. "What kind of business was it?" I asked. She waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, you know, Kevin, some tech startup thing. The details aren't important. What's important is that he's family, and he needs our help." The pressure didn't just come from her. The next day, her mother called me. "Mark, darling," she chirped, "Sarah told me you were going to help Kevin out. You're such a wonderful husband. He has the Midas touch, that boy. Any money you lend him is an investment in all of our futures." Her father was more direct. "It's your duty, son," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You're part of this family now. We support our own." I was the outsider, the provider-in-law. My role was clear. I was to work, and my work was to fund Kevin's failures. Against my better judgment, I wrote the check. I told myself it was a one-time thing. I had no idea it was just the first brick in a long, expensive road to ruin. That one-time thing became a quarterly ritual. First, it was the $5,000 for the failed startup. 6 months later, it was $10,000 for a guaranteed crypto investment that evaporated overnight. Then came the $7,000 he needed for a down payment on a luxury car, because as Sarah explained, he needs to look successful to attract investors. My savings account, once a source of pride and security, became Kevin's personal emergency fund. Every time I reached a financial goal, a new crisis would conveniently appear, and my hard-earned money would be siphoned away. Our dream of buying a house was constantly being pushed back. Vacations were cancelled. The plans I had to perhaps one day start my own small architectural firm felt like a distant, impossible fantasy. My life was a treadmill of work, save, and surrender. When I tried to protest, the family's blame machine would whir to life. Sarah would accuse me of not loving her enough. "If you loved me, you'd support my brother," she'd say, her eyes welling up with tears that I now know were pure manipulation. Her parents would double down. "Mark, we're so disappointed," her mother would sigh over the phone. "We thought you were one of us, but you're holding Kevin back with your negativity." Her father would patronizingly explain that I just didn't understand high-level business. I was a worker bee, not a visionary like Kevin. I was being gaslit from 3 different directions, made to feel like my financial prudence was a character flaw. I was completely isolated. The woman I slept next to every night was not my partner. She was their agent, sent to collect a tax on my existence. The breaking point for my sanity came when we finally did manage to scrape together another down payment. We found a modest but decent house. Next to it was an ugly, overgrown, undeveloped lot. It was considered undesirable because it was narrow and oddly shaped. While Sarah was busy planning how to decorate our new home, I took a small inheritance I had received from a grandparent and bought that useless patch of land. Sarah and her family mocked me relentlessly. "What are you going to do with that, Mark?" Kevin laughed. "Farm rocks." They called it Mark's Folly. I just smiled and said it was a long-term investment. In reality, it was the first thing I had ever owned that they couldn't touch. It was mine, and that tiny act of rebellion planted a seed. For a few years, things settled into a tense quiet. We lived in our house, and I paid the mortgage. Kevin was temporarily flush from some minor scheme that hadn't imploded yet, so the requests for money stopped. I began to foolishly hope that things had changed. I focused on my career, earning a promotion to a senior architect position. I even started taking on small freelance projects on the side, slowly building my own client base. My folly next door sat untouched, a quiet symbol of my one victory. But the peace was just the calm before the storm. The real hurricane was named Kevin, and he was about to make landfall directly on my life. He came over for dinner one Sunday, along with Sarah's parents. He was practically vibrating with excitement. He unrolled a set of cheap-looking blueprints on our dining table. "This," he announced, "is going to make us all rich. It's a boutique hotel development. The location is perfect. The projections are solid gold. I just need the seed capital." I already knew where this was going. I braced myself. David, my father-in-law, cleared his throat. "Mark, this is the big one. Kevin has the vision and you have the stability. We need to secure a business loan of $300,000. I nearly choked on my water. $300,000. It was an insane amount. "And how do you plan on securing a loan of that size with no capital and a history of failed ventures?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. Sarah shot me a venomous look, but Kevin just smiled his greasy, confident smile. "That's the best part," he said. "We use your house as collateral." I stared at him, then at Sarah, then at her parents. They were all nodding, smiling, as if this was the most reasonable suggestion in the world. They wanted me to gamble my home, the only real security we had, on Kevin's pipe dream. They weren't just asking for my savings anymore, they were asking for everything. This was the moment the fog finally cleared. I saw them for what they were, a pack of leeches, and I was done being the host. "No," I said. The word hung in the air, cold and final. "Absolutely not." The silence in the room was shattered. It was as if my single word had detonated a bomb. Kevin's face crumpled into a mask of theatrical disbelief. "You'd rather see me fail than help your own family?" he whined. His mother, Linda, clasped her hands to her chest. "I am so disappointed in you, Mark." After we welcomed you into our home, into our hearts. David just shook his head, his expression cold. I misjudged you, son. You don't have what it takes. But their reactions were just background noise. The only voice that mattered was Sarah's. She stood up, her chair scraping harshly against the floor. Her face was pale with fury. You are the most selfish man I have ever known, she spat, her voice dripping with contempt. All these years you've been jealous of him, jealous of his ideas, his charisma. You've been secretly hoping he'd fail all along, haven't you? I was stunned into silence. I tried to speak, to reason with her, to remind her of the tens of thousands of dollars, of the sacrifices, of my own abandoned dreams. But it was like talking to a brick wall. She didn't see a husband trying to protect their future. She saw an enemy blocking her brother's path to glory. This is it, Mark, she said, her voice dropping to a deadly calm. If you won't support my family, then you are not my husband. I want a divorce. The legal battle was a slaughter. Guided by her father, Sarah played the victim card perfectly. She claimed I was emotionally abusive and controlling with money. She painted my refusal to fund Kevin's schemes as an attempt to isolate her from her family. Her lawyer was ruthless. They went after the house, claiming she deserved it as compensation for my financial tyranny. They went after our savings, conveniently forgetting the black hole named Kevin they had been poured into. I was exhausted and heartbroken. I just wanted it to be over. When it came to dividing the final assets, my lawyer mentioned the undeveloped lot next door. Sarah literally laughed in the mediation room. Oh, let him have his dirt pile, she said with a dismissive wave. He can live there in a tent for all I care. I want the house. They valued the lot at next to nothing. The judge signed off. She got the house, the furniture, the majority of what was left of our savings. I walked away with my car, my clothes, and a plot of land everyone believed was worthless. I moved into a cramped, depressing apartment across town. I had lost everything. Or so she thought. The first 6 months were hell. I lived on cheap takeout, surrounded by cardboard boxes I didn't have the energy to unpack. Every night, I'd lie awake in my sterile, lonely apartment, replaying the years of sacrifice and the final, brutal betrayal. Social media was a minefield. I'd see pictures of Sarah hosting parties in my old house, the one I paid for. There she'd be, smiling with Kevin and her parents on the deck I built with my own hands. They toasted with champagne, celebrating a victory funded by my life's work. The anger was a cold, hard knot in my stomach. It wasn't a fiery rage, but a deep, motivating bitterness. They thought they had broken me. They were wrong. They had just given me a reason to live. My work became my sanctuary. I poured all that pain and anger into my job. I worked 80-hour weeks, taking on every freelance project I could find. I wasn't just an architect anymore, I was a man on a mission. I saved every penny, living like a monk. One night, fueled by caffeine and spite, I pulled up the city planning records for my old neighborhood. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. I just wanted to look at the survey of the one thing that was still mine, Mark's folly. I started digging through municipal archives, cross-referencing zoning codes, and looking at geological surveys. And then I found it, a recently passed obscure municipal ordinance buried deep in the City Council's latest planning docket. It was a rezoning initiative for that specific block, designed to increase housing density. My narrow, undesirable lot had been rezoned. It was no longer restricted to a single-family dwelling. It was now approved for multi-story, high-density construction up to a height of 50 feet. Sarah and her family, in their rush to grab the immediate prize, had been completely oblivious. They saw a useless patch of weeds. I saw a blank canvas with a permit for a masterpiece. A wave of cold clarity washed over me. I could sell the lot for a massive profit and disappear. But where was the justice in that? They would never know. No, my revenge wouldn't be a quiet bank deposit. It would be made of steel, glass, and concrete. It would be a monument to their arrogance that they would have to look at every single day. I pulled out a sketch pad and began to draw. The next 2 years of my life were a blur of disciplined obsession. During the day, I was a senior architect at my firm. At night, I was the head of my own one-man company, Phoenix Architectural Solutions. The name felt appropriate. I spent countless hours refining the design for my new home. It wasn't just a house, it was a statement. A 3-story monolith of glass, steel, and dark grey stone, designed with clean, aggressive lines. It featured a rooftop garden, a 4-car garage built into the bedrock, and a wall of floor-to-ceiling windows that faced away from Sarah's property, looking out towards the distant city skyline. Most importantly, its western wall was a sheer, imposing facade, strategically placed to cast a permanent shadow over my old backyard. Every afternoon, I took my meticulously detailed plans, the rezoning ordinance, the geological surveys, and my now impressive portfolio of freelance successes to a private equity firm I'd done some work for. My pitch wasn't a desperate plea. It was a rock-solid business proposition. They saw the numbers, the vision, and the guaranteed value of the property. The funding was approved without a single mention of using an existing home as collateral. While Sarah and her family were likely celebrating Kevin's latest failure, I was quietly signing the papers that would fund my resurrection. The first sign of activity on the lot was a survey crew. I saw Sarah watching from her window, a smirk on her face. She probably thought I was selling my dirt pile for pocket change. A week later, the excavators arrived. Her smirk vanished. I'll never forget the look on her face as the first scoop of earth was lifted. She marched to the edge of her property, her arms crossed. "Mark, what on earth is going on?" she demanded. "I'm building," I said, not even bothering to turn and face her directly. I was speaking to my site foreman. "Building what? A shed?" she scoffed, though her voice wavered with uncertainty. "Something like that," I replied coolly. "You'll see." And she did see. She watched as the crews dug a foundation deep into the bedrock, a foundation far bigger than her entire house. She watched as the first steel beams were craned into place, creating a skeleton that towered over her roofline. She watched as the framing for the second story went up, and then the third. Her prize, her trophy from our divorce, was shrinking day by day. The afternoon sun that used to flood her living room was now blocked by the stark, rising shadow of my success. The calls started coming then, first from her, then her mother, then her father. I didn't answer. I just let the work continue. With the third story framed and the roof trusses being installed, their panic escalated into action. The first to approach was Kevin. He sauntered onto my property, past the no trespassing signs, with that familiar, oily smile plastered on his face. "Mark! My man!" he shouted over the noise of a nail gun. "This is incredible. I always knew you had a big vision. Listen, I've been thinking, this place is great, but with my marketing savvy and your design, we could turn this into a real landmark. I'm thinking we form a partnership." He was already trying to get his hands on my success, to claim a piece of the victory. I gestured to my foreman, who immediately walked over. "Kevin," I said, my voice flat and devoid of any emotion. "This is an active construction site with a strict insurance policy. You are not authorized personnel. You're trespassing. Please leave the premises immediately." The smile melted from his face, replaced by a flash of his true, entitled nature. "You can't talk to me like that," he sputtered. My foreman, a large man named Gus, took a step forward. Kevin scurried off the property like a kicked dog. The age of his charisma getting him whatever he wanted was over. Next came the parents. Linda ambushed me by my car one morning, her face a mask of practiced sorrow. "Mark, please," she pleaded, dabbing at her dry eyes with a tissue. "We were wrong. We see that now. We were just blinded by our love for our son. But this, This is tearing Sarah apart. Can't you find it in your heart to forgive, to stop this? I just looked at her. You want forgiveness? Did you ask for my forgiveness when you encouraged my wife to divorce me and take my home? You made your choice, Linda. Now live with it. Her husband tried a different approach a few days later, attempting to corner me with a business proposition. All right, you've made your point, Mark, David said, trying to sound like a reasonable patriarch. You've proven you're a smart guy, so be smart. Sell us the lot back. We'll even give you a generous profit. Name your price. I laughed. My price? My price is that you get to watch. That's all. This isn't for sale. This is my home. Sarah grew more and more unhinged. She filed endless, frivolous complaints with the city about noise, debris, and zoning, all of which were promptly dismissed as my project was meticulously planned and 100% compliant. Her prized possession, the symbol of her great victory over me, was now just a cottage living in the permanent shadow of my folly. The property value she had been so proud of was plummeting. Who would want to buy a house that was perpetually eclipsed by the architectural behemoth next door? They had tried charm, emotional blackmail, and money. Nothing worked. They were out of options. And when people like them run out of options, they don't give up. They get lawyers. It arrived on a Tuesday, delivered by a courier. A thick, intimidating envelope containing a summons. Sarah, with her parents and brother as co-plaintiffs, was suing me. The legal jargon was dense, but the core argument was laughable. They were suing me for private nuisance and malicious construction. They claimed my home was being built purely out of spite, that it was designed to intentionally block their sunlight, ruin their view, and destroy their property value. They were demanding a court-ordered injunction to halt all construction immediately and were seeking $350,000 in damages, the estimated loss in their home's value. In their minds, they were entitled not only to their own property, but to the sky above mine as well. Their arrogance was breathtaking. They truly believed they could use the law to enforce their personal desires. They hired a team of expensive lawyers from a top city firm, confident that they could bully me into submission. They probably imagined I would be terrified, that I'd be forced to the negotiating table, and they could extort a massive settlement out of me. They didn't know that I had been waiting for this. This lawsuit wasn't a threat, it was a gift. It was the public stage I needed for the final act of their downfall. I met with my lawyer, a sharp woman named Ms. Davies. I wasn't the broken, exhausted man she had represented in the divorce. I was a different person entirely, calm, focused, and armed with a mountain of evidence. I laid it all out on her conference table, the city-approved blueprints, the signed permits for every stage of construction, the official rezoning ordinance they had ignored, the documentation of their frivolous complaints and Kevin's trespassing, and then the masterstroke, a copy of the finalized divorce decree, the one where Sarah herself, in the presence of lawyers and a judge, had laughed and eagerly signed away her rights to my worthless dirt pile. I also provided the bank statements from my marriage, showing the relentless financial drain from Kevin's schemes. They aren't suing me over sunlight, Ms. Davies, I said. They're suing me over regret. A slow, predatory smile spread across her face. Mr. Larson, she said, they have just handed us the shovel to bury them. The day of the hearing arrived. I saw them across the courtroom, huddled with their legal team, looking smug. They thought this was their final victory. They had no idea they were walking into a perfectly laid trap. The judge's gavel slammed down with a crack that echoed the breaking of their spirits. Sarah stared at me from the plaintiff's table, her face a pallid mask of disbelief. Her mother, Linda, looked like she was about to faint. They didn't understand how they could possibly lose. They had the expensive lawyers, the righteous indignation, the absolute certainty of their own entitlement. What they didn't have was a case. My lawyer, Ms. Davies, was methodical. She dismantled them piece by piece. First, she presented the mountain of permits and the zoning ordinance, proving my construction was not just legal, but a model of compliance. The judge quickly grew impatient with their claims of nuisance. Then came the cross-examinations. When David, my former father-in-law, was on the stand, Ms. Davies calmly asked, "Mr. Vance, isn't it true that just before my client's divorce, you and your son asked him to secure a $300,000 loan for your son's business, using his private home as collateral?" David sputtered and denied, but his credibility was shot. When Sarah took the stand, Ms. Davies produced the divorce decree. "Ms. Vance," she asked, her voice like ice, "is this your signature, agreeing to cede this worthless dirt pile to my client in exchange for the much more valuable house?" Sarah's face flushed crimson. I didn't know," she stammered. "You didn't know, or you didn't care to look," Ms. Davies pressed. "You made a calculated business decision in your divorce. This lawsuit isn't about sunlight. It's about a bad investment you made. You bet on the wrong asset." The judge had heard enough. He dismissed their case with prejudice, but he didn't stop there. "This lawsuit is a transparent and malicious attempt to extort money from the defendant," he boomed, looking down at them over his spectacles. "It is a frivolous abuse of the judicial process. Not only is the case dismissed, but I am ordering the plaintiffs to pay for all of Mr. Larson's legal fees." A collective gasp went through their side of the room. Their lawsuit, designed to get $350,000 from me, would now cost them a fortune. I walked out of the courtroom and didn't look back. I didn't need to see their faces. Their defeat was absolute. A few months later, I moved into my finished home. It is magnificent. Sometimes I stand on my rooftop garden at sunset, looking down at the house next door. A for sale sign went up last week. I heard they had to sell to cover the legal fees I was awarded. The house, her great prize, is the very thing that sealed her ruin. I feel nothing when I look at it now. No anger, no hate. Just a profound, quiet peace. They built my prison of resentment, and from its stones I built my palace. And every day they were forced to watch,